Reflective podcast.
Blessings and welcome to another episode of the Fully Reflective podcast. I am blissfully funneling through this prism and interacting with this prism. Do you go by Daniela? Is that the proper pronunciation?
That was perfect,
Beautiful.
Daniela.
Daniela. I first found your energy signature through Instagram, through a friend that had told me I had made it clear to some nearby relationships that I was looking for somebody that was really attuned to the Akashic Records, that I had had some experiences where I was like, I'm pretty sure this isn't my own template of mental identity memory. This is like, pretty sure this is what they call the Akash. So I'd had these experiences of the Akashic Records kind of unveiling themselves to me. And I felt like, man, I would really love to hone this with an actual like aligned, trained someone who has some level of initiation in that process. And I forgot even who it was, but they sent me to you. And then recently, years later, we reconnected, and I was just inspired by your luminosity, your bioluminescence, your embodiment, your chemistry, your harmony, and your articulation. And your sessions are a beautiful gift to anyone who comes to your path, and felt like it'd be a fun opportunity for us to open up some more topics that would be kind of around that of who, and not just who but what you are, the who and what you are. And we had mentioned before we started recording that it's not always about me, and yet the me and the I am funnels through a human karmic template, and it does show up. Our story does act as a form of service for others and others for us. So I guess I'll kind of like build a bit more of a tapestry of a question instead of just saying like, who are you? But I would say, who are you in the framework of understanding that you're not just your temporary mental identity? What has your process been in discovering the depth of who you are? And what do you feel called to share about who and what you find yourself to be?
Ooh. Wow, what a deep question. As a little girl, I remember feeling like I was really connected to everything and everyone. I remember feeling one at times with the trees and with my backyard and with other people too. I was very intuitive, very psychic. I could sense people's thoughts and I felt very connected. And as connected as I felt, I also felt really, really, in a sense, isolated and lonely. Sometimes I felt like I was the only one perceiving life in that way. When I was 17, I had a profound spiritual awakening opening through my very first time ever meditating. I read a book called Many Lives, Many Masters by Brian Weiss. And then I
That book
listened
changed my
to,
life as well. Sorry to jump in, but
yes, it was such a reminder. It was an activator of all of everything that I knew, but I knew at a subconscious, unconscious level because I was so conditioned by the world around me and doing my best to belong and to really meet the people, the culture, the society around me. So that woke me up. There was a CD in that book, the book that I had, and I listened to it and did the meditation, and I had this profound psychic opening. After that, I was put on psychiatric medicines, and that completely just shut everything down. Years later, I recognized, okay, this really doesn't feel right. It's kind of fun to be on antidepressants and, the anti-anxiety meds and the sleeping medicines. It had its fun to it, but I realized that I had changed over the course of those years, and I was not connected to my empathy, not connected to my intuitive nature. I wasn't connected to my compassion, to my sensitivity, and I wasn't feeling really. I felt happy and excited, but I didn't feel anything else, and it just felt off. So, got off those little by little, started opening again spiritually, had some really profound experiences through first it was I had one profound experience with ayahuasca, the plant medicines, another one with bufo, which is 5-MeO DMT,
Mhm.
where I became the void, and I was the void for an eternity. And then from there, I condensed into this tiny little speck. And then I exploded out into infinity for an eternity and became every dimension and planet and galaxy in existence. I was like the goddess giving birth to endless stars and galaxies. And at the same time as I was giving birth to those stars and galaxies and dimensions, I was also every single being within them. And that was a really profound experience for me. My intention in that experience was to connect with the Akashic Records. And I felt like I became all. And it was such an expansion of my consciousness that it helped me. Ever since then, I feel like I've had a more fluid relationship to my ego, to my personality, to my identity. There's a recognition that while I'm having this experience of individuation and of separation from the all, I actually am the all. And beyond that, there's an aspect of me that is the creator of it all. And that because of that experience, I feel like that is a little bit more integrated in my being, which supports my work and supports my access to the cosmic mind and to Akashic perspective. That's what I call it when I access the Akashic records. I call it Akashic perspective because I don't feel that we can access the Akashic records in their entirety simply because they are the knowing or the remembering of infinity and eternity, which is incomprehensible to the human mind. And it's not really relevant to this human experience because in this experience, we're perceiving everything through this very limited, linear lens. And the Akashic records are all possibilities and it's endless paradoxes and it's infinite potential. And yeah, it's like, what can the human mind do with that? Mm.
Potentially abuse it, and if calibrated and if attuned in dharma and devotional service, then it can be utilized, at least from this perspective. It seems to be able to be utilized to give others incredibly potent reflectivity to their soul's true identity that actually bypasses the coagulation of the egoic identity and allows others to see something that's the most real or the most true, and potentially tap into some timelines that help them traverse the geography of their current now. Um, but yeah, not relevant for everybody. Did you start feeling like your template of egoic structure was meant for you to find the Akasha? Like when you found like, ooh, it's called the Akashic Records. This is the thing that I'm somehow designed to do. Did you feel like a kind of puzzle piece fit for your, I use the word geometry a lot because part of the Rocco identity, even since young, was like really fascinated with how puzzles interconnected, but also how growing up in rural, like country, woods, and wilderness, father of this one showed like how the ridge of that hill goes like this, but the oak tree protects it. And so that's why the deer travel right there. That's why that deer trail is right there and not over there. It's the geometry actually of this piece of earth that's actually guiding
Mm.
energy. And I didn't have this language as a kid, but along my awakening experience, I found it so interesting to talk to others which is why this podcast is now a thing. I find it so interesting to talk to others about, like, man, how did it happen for you? And how did the light, the bioluminescence, start coordinating between that? I'd say it's a time-based identity and a non-time-based identity, or an eternal identity that I would say all of us have. And um, did you find that clicking in as, like, how was that for you? Was that comforting? Was that like, this is my, I'm meant to do something with the Akashic Records? Was there like an identity of like an aha moment click in for you along that way?
Yeah, I unexpectedly received an Akashic record reading, which I didn't understand. I thought maybe it was something about my ancestry. I didn't really have any interest in having my records read. It felt very limiting. But it was a gift from a facilitator at a retreat that I had gone to. So I received, and everything that she's shared came true in a really roundabout symbolic way. And I was blown away. So I started Googling the Akashic Records, and I found the same prayer that she had used when she opened up my records. And I opened up the records, and it was one of the most profound experiences of my life. All I had to do was say the prayer. I said it with so much intention and so much hope and desire to connect. And I didn't really, I guess I didn't think it would work or wouldn't work. I didn't think much at all, really. But I was immediately flooded with this incredible high frequency energy. And I was transported into this perspective where everything that I was perceiving through the lens of unconditional love and radical acceptance. And I suddenly had such clear access to psychic insight, psychic information, to other people's, to like relevant information that I could channel for them. Like immediately after I did that, I called my mom and I asked her, "Oh, can I do an Akashic record reading on you and like practice this new modality that I just discovered?" And she was like, "Yeah, of course." And I suddenly had clear access to her memories as relevant to the questions that she was asking. So it was a really profound experience. And from that first experience, I knew that was my destiny. I was like, this is my dharma. I have found my dharma. I think it felt to me the same way that other people describe when they meet a soulmate or a life partner, how you just, people are like, I just knew. And then there's this period, this honeymoon stage of being in this high, of being so in love, of being like, that's what it was like for me. It was months of healing, of profound transformation, of my life transforming, of every day opening myself up to more and more and more love, and feeling so comforted that I had found my dharma, that I had reconnected with this energy that felt like me.
Sounds like fireworks.
It was amazing. It was incredible. My life has not been the same since. It's been so healing.
Wow. So
Yeah.
these two perspectives are relatively oriented to and from the domain being referenced, but how would you articulate if I was just Joe Schmo working at a gas station, never touched metaphysical initiation stuff like this? I just called it all spirituality, and I potentially had a deep Southern accent. And how would you describe to a perspective like that, what are the Akashic records and what would be the point of learning about them or knowing them?
I suppose the Akashic records from the human perspective is a higher perspective. It's a perspective that captures more perspectives. So we each have our own individuated perspective, and it is shaped by our past experiences, by our conditioning, by our culture, by our judgments, by our opinions, beliefs, traumas, everything. When we access Akashic perspective, we come into what I experience as an elevated, expanded state of consciousness where we transcend aspects of our human personality and the limitations of our personal human mind. And from that space, we can see through the lens of other people, of other beings, and of it feels like a higher perspective. It's like a bird's eye view on our life, on who we are, on our relationships, on anything and everything. And I find it incredibly valuable because our mind, when we're perceiving everything from this limited lens, we tend to loop in karmic dynamics or karmic patterns. We can have judgments which limit our capacity for love, limit our capacity for peace, for presence, for possibility. We can have all sorts of beliefs that limit us. And as soon as we come into that elevated state, we see life and ourselves and others through a lens that offers us trust, peace, forgiveness, compassion, love. And as we connect with all of that, we return to the state of infinite possibility. It's like that quantum realm where we're no longer limited by our karmic patterns and our karmic habits, and we're not perpetuating these cycles. We can transcend them because we're bringing forth consciousness. That's really what access and Akashic perspective is. It's bringing forth consciousness. And that's the only thing stronger than our karma, than our habits, than our patterns, than our judgments, than our limiting beliefs. That's what illuminates what is in our subconscious. And I don't remember who said it, but maybe it was Carl Jung, who's like something along the lines of our subconscious or our unconscious is ruling our lives and we call it fate. Like some sort of quote like that. Do you know what I'm talking
Right.
about?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact words, but the Akashic perspective is what sheds light on the subconscious and the unconscious. And then we become the creators of our fate, of our
Hmm.
destiny.
Hmm. Beautiful articulation. Yeah, that's it. One of the things that my perspective has been kind of gracefully and simultaneously forcibly, forced to see, like I had my eyes peeled back, like that scene from Clockwork Orange, like over the years of what was, and this was like one of my primary like impulses or directives that I would now call as like one of my primary Dharma 0 points. And it was to have visceral, vivid understanding of the difference between ego and soul. Like that as just like a super simple, what's this and then what's that? And hearing the word ego thrown around so much in society and pop culture, and uh, interacting with other people, and they'll be like, yeah, but that's their ego, and seeing them use it in a certain way and another person use the word in a different way. um, Everything for me really shifted when I found a Sifu teacher in the yoga lineage, Will Dupree, in 2016. And I was 26, and I'd studied all kinds. I dove into Carl Jung for a while, dove into a lot of esoteric, found Brian Weiss, Many Lives, Many Masters at like 22, I think 21 was when that book came to me. Got into Course in Miracles for a while, found the Kabbalion, the Three Initiates, Hermeticism, Thoth, Hermes Trismegistus teachings, Law of Attraction. All this stuff was like helpful, but like I still was like, wait, what is the most important thing to actually genuinely know? Because there's so much stuff that you could spend so much time on, of like studying or checking in on. And my compass was, I would say, kind of frustrated that it wasn't like a simplified way. But when Raja Yoga and Kriya Yoga found me, it was this language of the Atma, ATMA. Are you familiar with that term? The Atma, the Jiva Atma? The Jiva Atma and then the Paramatma. And I saw this like, yogic drawing or something like that. And it was like the Jiva Atma is what most people call as the soul or the soul self, which then metaphysically is the crystalline self, which is the etymological reason for the Christos or the Christ. It's actually a component of our celestial body, of the Merkaba. The actual toroidal field is collapsing in a very specific moment, and it's turning into physiological experience. Prior to that, it's non-physical. And that moment is this chrism, is this crystal moment of crossing this threshold between non-material and then into the material. None get to the source but through me, was like this, like, whoa. And so the Jiva Atma had this larger perspective, or a higher perspective, a more refined and nuanced perspective that was the Paramatma. And I was like, wow, so that's what, it just felt like it answered a lot for me. And when you describe what you're describing, you know, we study these like people who have figured stuff out along the way. And when I hear certain quotes from Albert Einstein or Carl Jung, when I listen to Krishnamurti talk or Ram Dass talk and a lot of Terence McKenna stuff, it's like everyone who's ever figured anything out spiritually has found the Akash, found where information really comes from. And I find it very inspirational and kind of like comforting when my system interfaces with another system that has integrated that. To me, there's this like biochemical auric effulgence. Effulgence is like bright glow that just kind of is like mist honey that's like fizzling in the field. And it's consciousness, and it's not mental consciousness. It's not mental identity. It is lovingness, but it is an embodied lovingness that shows up as dharma. It shows up in the facial structure. That reminds me of this other kind of inquiry, baton to pass you. Are you familiar with the term or the book, the Law of One, the Teachings of Ra? Oh, I think you're muted, maybe. I did not hear you. Can you hear me? Oh yeah, I hear you. I hear me. I can hear me. Can you hear me? Oh, you know. Oh, there you go.
Okay, this actually turned off. Let me plug it in.
Hey, you know, technical difficulties happen. Oh,
Okay,
that was a cool sound.
We should be good.
Ooh, those are cool sounds. Sound high frequency. The book Law of One, Teachings of Ra.
I've heard of it. And interestingly, I was writing last night for my Akashic training. I write these PDFs, and what came through was the Law of One. But I've just heard of it, but I've never read it or anything. So I was actually writing about that last night.
Wow, very cool collection of information, and the pathway that these folks that went about anchoring it in very much through the process of channeling. Something that I'd also like to ask you later, though. Right now, the question that came up was so in Law of One, in the Teachings of Ra, was the first time, and for me, this came into my field at like 2017, I think. And I had never heard such a clear distillation of the different gradients of consciousness. And it talked about them as the densities: the first density, second density, third density, fourth density, fifth density, sixth density, seventh density was technically the bandwidth spectrum of how consciousness was organizing itself in this reality, this dimension. Mineral life was first density, plant and animal life, second density. Most Homo sapiens are in third density, which is, I'd see this in perfect mirror also as you can visualize the chakra system. Manipura, or yellow chakra, third ray, is this yellow bandwidth, which interestingly enough is the color of the sun and is the color of this idea of the soul shining. It's the color of a yellow glowing light. And the next step above that is anahata, or this evolution into the heart, and then et cetera, et cetera. Someone like Yeshua's template is like, that's what fourth density looks like. Someone who lives in the matrix and primarily identifies as their story, their trauma, and their temporarily based calcified identity would be considered third density. And said that just as like background to this next question, which is, in your work with others, and not even just your work with others, but in your interaction, and I ask because it's part of my experience, and definitely why this podcast is called Fully Reflective, because I started seeing bioluminescence. That was one of the side effects of my recalibration. And I wonder what your experience is in sensing a soul's density or someone's consciousness, how clean their consciousness is, what's the contents of their context. Is there anything that you have experienced that feels like it's a transition from like your previous identity that was quote unquote maybe less aware or less conscious in specifically in interacting with other people, in this Akashic integration perspective and embodiment and dharmic alignment that you're in? What are those signposts, or what's most relevant as noticing and signposts in dealing with other people and choosing who to open self to and share time with and calibrate accordingly? What has been your experience of the densities, the different densities of consciousness from someone else?
I would say the biggest shift is from seeing these different, perhaps, levels to seeing more equality between all beings and perceiving everyone's consciousness. No one is above, no one is below, no one is more spiritually advanced, no one is more spiritually inferior. It's more that we're all holding different perspectives, and every perspective is equally as valid and equally as true in its own right. Seeing people through that lens more and more and more, and simply recognizing when there's a resonance between me and another being, and where I naturally feel inspired to really bring them in close, while giving myself permission to have certain human preferences where perhaps I don't feel inspired to connect with some people, and that's okay. And that doesn't make me not compassionate or not loving, or I'm like healing from being maybe like trying to be spiritual, trying to be loving, trying to be compassionate. Like also recognizing that in our dynamics with people, we each have an alchemy. It's like when two elements come together, they have a natural alchemical reaction. And we don't have to blame ourselves for whatever that alchemy may be. We just get to take responsibility for our role and direct our energy accordingly. So I've learned a lot about responsibility for the reflection that I receive in a relationship. And ultimately, I no longer feel like there are real spiritual teachers that are necessarily above or more evolved or more advanced. It feels like everybody is a spiritual teacher and everybody is a spiritual student. And I honor that we all have so much value and wisdom to share in our own right. And just because my human self may not judge something as accurate or correct, it's not that it's not accurate or correct, it's just that it's not in resonance with the direction that my soul is choosing to head in. Because ultimately in these experiences of life, and this human experience, we're just naturally limited. We're naturally limited in our perspective. We are in this experience of duality where in a sense we choose one. Like we choose one direction, we choose one way at a time versus the encompassing of all. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. it inspires me to lean into a specific fractal of that, which is, I feel like it's become such a hashtagable thing, which is like spiritual bypassing and like spiritual people. And I lived in LA for the past 10 years, and I started getting like almost hypersensitive to as soon as someone started saying spiritual things, and even maybe dressing spiritual. Like the fact that someone could dress spiritual is maybe a signpost of it. And it's also what led me to my teacher, because he was so no BS. And not that someone who's all light and fluffy and kittens is BS, but there's something that was like, the word is integration for me. It's like it felt integrated. It didn't feel like it was operating from a identity that wanted these things to be more real because they were higher or more evolved or more special or in spiritual, that they kept getting called spiritual. And it devalued things on the ground, boots on the ground, hands in the dirt. And it felt like sterile and like disconnected. And then also felt like some of these kind of other ways of talking about it is like, it's a type of privilege that comes from this like first world operation system of an identity that's like, bro, if you're operating up there and you don't even know this is happening, it's like that's just byproduct of the system and our culture that allows you to think that that's all that's up there, and not address this stuff, or not that you have to live in it, but integrate that is there, accept and operate as all is occurring, not by discounting other things that are occurring. And saying that is saying, I hear you when you say like all perspectives are equal, and I know this to be true. And I know that when I walk outside and I see this squirrel and I see the hawk fly above, and I see a splash in the water and there's a fish and then the turtle's there, and then a human being speaks to me, and then the puppy dog snorts, and then we go into town and there's people, maybe they have a sign on the side of the road and they asking for help, and then there's another person putting on a suit and getting into a car and walking into a bank. All of these perspectives, I would say, yeah, they're equal. They're all accessing Maya, and they're all accessing the cave, Plato's cave. Are you familiar with Plato's cave? It's really cool. It's just like a metaphor, but he wrote about it in depth, this guy Plato. And it's just a profound, simple, tactile allegory for what waking up into higher states of consciousness really is. And then you try to tell somebody about it who hasn't arrived at that nuanced recognition, and they'll tell you that you're crazy, or they'll tell you that you're tripping, because they have this kind of thing going on where their blinders are on, and they see this world, they see this reality, and they aren't in resonance with this other perspective that you could say is a higher perspective. And I only say higher because, well, that's really it. So even saying that, it's like the higher perspective, yeah, but we're all equal. It's almost like, do you feel like, I feel like it, that there's become like a hypersensitivity to things that are non-inclusive and things that are hierarchy based orientation, languaging, specifically in language. But like, not every soul has embodied their karmic dharma in the same way. You know, I've met some yogis, and some yogis are beautiful beings, like amazing, beautiful beings that I would just love with all of my heart and all of my eye contact. And then there's some other yogis that are so activated in understanding what they came here to do that their signal, it just vibrates in a slightly different way. If we were like measuring for the sake of understanding, not measuring for the sake of competition, because I think that's where the sensitivity comes from, is that we're in this like age now of trauma from all the competition, from all the age of Pisces, Saturnized, boundary emphasizing competition. I do feel that. So I feel like this protocol that comes from when someone arrives at more nuanced accountability within themselves. They're able to recognize that same model within every soul. Saying all that to say, in what you just said, like, it's not sometimes vibrationally coherent to interact with somebody. It doesn't mean that there's someone higher or someone lower. It just doesn't match. It doesn't arrive at a harmonious interaction. So we're just gonna, we're just choose not to. I said it recently. It's just like, yeah, I love everybody, but I don't want to go do heroin with you in the back alley of McDonald's. And we're all equal, but I'm good on heroin and I'm good on McDonald's, and we're all equal. But those type of activities definitely put somebody in a density. Does that make sense? Do you feel kind of where I'm walking towards with this?
Yeah, I think so.
I'm interested to hear your perspective on it, because I feel your gentle soul, and I feel your sincerity and your genuineness in interacting with human beings, and understanding the law of one really is like, no, there's one consciousness from all of our perspectives. There's one consciousness that's literally operating this whole thing, and we have forgotten because we're in this thing. And then some have remembered, and then some have really remembered, and some have remembered and then even forgotten how deeply they've remembered, to such a degree that their life is this big service. I think of someone like Yogananda, or there's these stories about this dude Ramakrishna, and I don't know, not everybody's Michael Jackson. Not everybody is the Dalai Lama. Not to say anything is good or bad about those two people, or Oprah, or Marilyn Manson, or Bruce Lee, or Sadhguru. But I'm interested in what you see about karmic embodiment, specifically with the Akashic Records or the Akashic field in mind. I see it particularly as everybody here is an alchemist. No one cannot do alchemy. So all that's happening is different souls are alchemizing the gradients of their color spectrum in different degrees of acceleration, different degrees of efficiency, different degrees of directness and indirectness. And so many factors are there. So it's not really a measurement to say that someone is better or worse hierarchically in society, but more so, at least from the tapestry that I feel like I'm pulling the sewing web from, it's this inquiry to your field as to, like, in you, at least, just speaking for you, personally, do you see this as a helpful recognition system of like getting a sense of where anybody is, like having a level of self-awareness for self, and then that takes us out into these interactions, again, not to be social hierarchy based, but almost to have an electromagnetic basis of our interactive awareness. Is any of this making sense?
Yeah, it's very hard for me to track and know how to respond, because there were like 6 different questions within that, but then
I
more
know,
talking, and then a different question, and then more talking. It's like, I want to know your perspective on this. I want to know your perspective of that. So yeah, a little
right?
time out here. So I'm like trying to remember, but there were just so many, and now I have no idea what I'm answering. So if like
Thank
there's
you.
a question, maybe allow for the question to be answered, because it's like, I want to know your perspective on this, but then there's more talking, totally different topic. I want to know your perspective on this, more talking, totally different topic. And I'm like, wait, where are we? What am I going to answer? I'm so confused right now. Like,
Wow.
yeah.
Thank you for that. Thank you
Like
for
I
that
was trying to
reflection.
hold it all, but I couldn't at the end.
Thank you for that reflection. That's honestly what I experienced. My body just got flushed with heat hearing your reflection of kind of sometimes how I don't stop when the question was perfectly just stop talking. That was a good question. Stop there. Um, so yeah, if you ever feel a moment where I potentially am not stopping and you feel like that's the question, maybe send me a signal or something. But let me find the actual real specificity of to what I was kind of pointing at. Yeah, I mean, I think that's actually the point, is that it is an overwhelming bandwidth of humanity. But the guy in the crack alley choosing to abuse his blessed body being temple, and the person that's choosing to go and do sadhana to move into their karmic structure, one is walking away from it and one is moving towards it. They are equal in the eye of spirit, but karmically, one is creating more karma fast, one is lessening their karma quickly. And this is interesting for me because it's mathematics, and mathematics is kind of the geometry of how this world organizes itself, and how it feels like the Akashic field is moving, getting moved by our conscious participation or not conscious participation. So along that line, what do you see in that? I guess it's like not a direct question really, but like, what
Yeah,
do you
so
see in that?
I can share with you what I see in that. I I see paradox. So while the crack addict in the alleyway, we may judge that he is not in karmic alignment, that he is creating more karma, yet there's a value and a necessity to all that is. If there wasn't, then it would not exist. And personally, my experiences with drug addiction have catapulted me into the direction of really living my dharma. Had I not had an experience of a drug addict, would I have run this far, this deep, this fast into my spiritual growth and expansion? If I hadn't gotten that low, rock bottom, I was addicted to opiates for a period of time, and it was incredibly catalyzing on so many levels. And I see it as an inseparable part of me living my dharma. So perhaps someone for this entire lifetime, they may be in a way where it seems like they're so far from really embodying their dharma, yet maybe that's what's setting them up in the lifetimes to come. And maybe that is what is necessary for them to come to completion around these karmic cycles. I felt like the karma that I was creating was around the avoidance of my own pain.
Mm.
And I went so deep in avoiding it that I was catapulted right into it, into the depths of it, which then broke me open and created a depth within me. Like I feel like I have touched upon these really dark, dark, dark spaces. Drug addiction will do that. I've also struggled with eating disorders. I was bulimic for a long time, been in an abusive relationship. I had an autoimmune disease. I've had these various experiences that may appear to be far from me living my dharma or creating more karma, yet I could not be who or how I am. I could not hold space for humanity, for my clients, the way that I do without having lived that, without having really gone so deep into the darkness. So I see that everything has its place and it's often incomprehensible to my human mind. I see the unity within all of us and how we're each playing our role, and how a lot of the energies that are moving through us don't even necessarily belong to us, because I feel that we are experiencing far more belief in separation than what is actually occurring. I see us as more interdependent, more interconnected in various ways. And even that perspective can be disempowering at times, because I find myself really impacted by the world around me. So then it can be nice to go into the other perspective of sovereignty, of I'm an individual, and that can be really empowering in moments. And what perspective is more true? Neither. It's a paradox. It's an endless paradox. And we get to play around with the perspectives that serve us in the moment, that are fun for us to play with. This is all, as you said the word Maya, we're all like living in the Maya and the illusion and the game. So we might as well have fun and enjoy it. And for me personally, I've seeking the truth, like seeking access to the Akashic Records, has landed me in a place where I just realized there is no truth. And there is no true and real access to the Akashic Records, because the human mind cannot possibly comprehend the infinite eternal nature of the Akashic Records. So instead, we just expand our consciousness to allow us access to different perspectives at different times. And then we have a more fluid relationship with our ego, which is incredibly supportive in life. We have happier, healthier relationships. We can grow beyond our karmic patterns far more quickly. We become more conscious in what it is that we are creating. It's a beautiful service, but there's still never one place where we land that is true or real or even definable.
You feel like that's where a lot of us get, you could say, maybe stuck, is in trying to spend too much time or trying too hard to define it, to define those undefinables?
Or to arrive somewhere, trying to arrive somewhere. Meanwhile, we are living and experiencing the Big Bang. We are eternally expanding out into infinity. The growth, the expansion, the change, the transformation, it never ends. We're constantly being reborn and dying and reborn and dying, and we'll never get where we think we're going because we're just going anywhere and everywhere all at once, and at the same time absolutely nowhere, because eternally we are simultaneously the void that never even came into being. It was all an illusion. It was all God's dream. So that's happening simultaneously too. It's like, whoa. And if you really try to figure it all out, it can get pretty maddening. It's like, all right, I'm just gonna have fun being a human.
It sounds like there was you touched it as like a bandwidth capacity. Like for you personally, you touched the capacity and you're like, all right, no more, I can't do that no more. Gotta let that go. It seems like that dropped you into kind of surrender. Does that sound about right?
There was a period of time after my Bufo experience where I was working with the Akashic Records daily and constantly seeking to access a higher perspective. And I became very ungrounded to the point where time didn't make sense. Me being in a human body and being that limited didn't make sense. And it started becoming more detrimental than it was beneficial. Like initially, the expansion, the elevation of consciousness was so beneficial, but then I just took it too far. And I learned the value of balance. And then I came home to my body, came home to this human experience. At that time, I was incredibly detached. I literally remember swimming in the ocean and being like, wow, a shark could bite my arm off. And I would be totally cool with it. I'd be like, oh, it's what life wanted. It's all divine and perfect. I was really detached. And it was almost an unhealthy level of detachment. It was like I had too much akasha, too much spaciousness in my being. And I
Wow.
think the majority of humanity doesn't have enough akasha.
Right.
We need more spaciousness in our minds, in our bodies. But I cultivated at one point too much. And it's all about balance in everything, even in our spiritual pursuits, I feel. That's just
Yeah.
my personal.
Yeah. Beautifully articulated. I heard you say elemental balance is really what you were saying, because I think of how at least in my lensing, the Akashic record of a person shows up in a certain way as facial geometry, but also as astrological geometry. It's like someone's astrology chart or their gene keys or their human design. It's like I feel like that's why people are so fascinated when they get a good reading from a really, embodied astrologer or Joytish or human design and gene keys, particular for me, very interesting, because it's like that's your Akash. Those are the etheric compositions of your being that you're now melded into this physical scenario with, but you're also the physical scenario just as much as you're the non-physical scenario. Um, when you said that, I heard that elemental balance. It's like some people that are a little too fiery, they need to balance that out with some water. That maybe at a moment in their life they've arrived at like some level of you know uh integration of those opposites, of those paradoxes. Does that sound about right?
Yeah. Yeah, for me, it feels like it's all about balance.
Feel that.
And sometimes for me to find balance, it's like I go from one extreme and then the other, like the pendulum
Hmm.
explores one side, then goes to the other side before it lands in balance. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's this endless, infinite human exploration. And from some perspectives, it's completely purposeless and meaningless. And then from other perspectives, it has infinite purpose and meaning. And ultimately, it gets to be whatever we make of it.
Mhm. Two questions coming up. One was one from earlier where I said when I asked you about that. I think the question was something about channeling. Like, how do you? I remember when I started watching Abraham Hicks, and I was just like, man, I wonder what that was like for Esther. And I remember reading about it in one of her books, that she was kind of describing the beginning experience of differentiating Esther's thoughts. Like, whoa, this is my human's thoughts. These are signals. These are signals coming into my body, my mind. I'm receiving these, and then now how I can dance with them, it's called channeling. It seems to be called channeling. How would you differentiate that articulation of like, someone's like, oh, I channeled that? Are most people, when they're saying like I channeled that, is that channeling? Is there just a tapestry of human impulses and inspiration that's somehow disconnected from higher realms or higher vibrational octaves?
I feel that everything is channeled.
Mm.
Everything that exists, because it's all coming from the void. Where do our thoughts come from? Where do our words come from? They're just stemming from emptiness. And to some degree, it feels like it's all channeled. And another perspective is I know that I'm in my channel when what is flowing through me is carrying the frequency. It carries a certain frequency, and it feels like love, acceptance, possibility, trust, and it feels expansive. It feels like, that's how I know I'm channeling when I'm in a client session with someone. I know that I'm not channeling. Like when I'm doing sessions for myself, I know that I'm not in channel when, if there's ever fear at all, if there's ever limitation on what's coming through, like this is how it is, period, done. Or if there's ever a, you need to do this, or you should do this, or you should change in this way, or you need to change in that way. I know that that's not channeling. I know that that's my human mind hijacking the experience in a sense.
Do you feel like the human mind tries to mimic those uh, I feel so sensitive to the word spiritual now, but
Mhm.
the sentence that was going to be, do you feel like the human mind actually is the mimicker? It's the deceiver in a way. Obviously, it is also a mental prism, not just a prison, but it can be. Do you feel like the mind is trying to mimic those type of things, like a true channeling experience of that's different than a mind trying to think its way into thinking those thoughts? Yeah.
Well, I feel that ultimately everything that comes through when we're channeling is interpreted through the mind to some degree or another. And of course, there are different levels of that where we have a trance channel, someone who's completely taken over and it doesn't even register in their consciousness. They don't even remember what they've channeled. And
Right.
everything about them drastically changes, their frequency, their tone of voice, their communication, perhaps their accent, everything.
Right.
I suppose there are an infinite number of ways of channeling. Everyone's got a different kind of channel.
Yeah. It feels like those flowers behind you. It's like it's funny, it's blending me back into the kind of scenario we were talking about a little while ago between the crackhead and I don't mean to demean crack or cocaine or other medicines that someone wants to work with, but I love the reframe that you provided on that, because it's true. Someone might see someone in deep suffering and that might inspire them to do something different. That person that was suffering, that might be the most perfect allegory for their soul to arrive at this moment, and then because of that hardship they turn around. Maybe they don't and their life ends tragically, and then the next life it turns around, or someone witnesses that life end, and that's the most empowering thing for them to never do that, et cetera, et cetera. So I very much hear you on that reframe. But this flowers behind you there kind of reminded me of that, of like alignment. I suppose it's the topic of alignment, and someone in their channel, it looks away. Now, it doesn't have to look anything like anything I've ever seen before, but when I interface with someone who's in their channel, I'm like, vibes, whatever that is, you doing it, keep doing it. God bless you. Thanks for blessing us. It feels awesome. When I interface with someone who I would say is running from the channel, or actually it sometimes feels like that's what succubus energy is it's like trying to, instead of channel and give or serve, it's like reverse the polarity of the prism, and now it's like attempting to drain luminosity from nearby surroundings as an attempt to get love from attention or destruction or something like that. So that's kind of where I was going with the, you know, the crackhead, proverbial crackhead. Just someone who is in a more contracted state, and how to navigate that. Yeah, it's like in this kind of paradigm that we're talking about, not right or wrong, but are there signposts for you? So okay, that was a bit of talking, and now this is the question. In your experience, are there signposts, and I'm sure there are, but are there signposts of when someone is in their aligned, embodied channel and when they are not?
I know that I am in my aligned embodied channel based on the way that the insight flowing through me feels and the frequency that it is carrying, and whether it expands and, in a sense, inspires. It's, you know what, it's just in their aligned embodied channel. That's already such a, as I'm looking at it, it's already such a judgment statement. Like either you're there or you're not. And because also I'm recognizing, even as I speak, that there are times where I have been in channel where I offer a reading that perhaps could be destructive to someone's perspective on life, which they may have an attachment to. They may have certain beliefs, and then I come into a reading with them and the channel destroys them. And from, are they inspired by the reading? Well, maybe not immediately. Typically what happens is people are like, what? And there can be some resistance at first. And then, and these types of readings rarely happen. I can only think of a handful. But when they have, the inspiration, the expansion does not come until much later. So how to determine whether we are in an embodied channel? I don't think we ever are, like completely or like not at all, because even channels that I love, like Bashar, I feel like, whoa, embodied channel, everything he says resonates with me. I love it. From someone else's perspective, it's like, no, that's nonsense. I don't agree with that. So they disagree. This person is not in an embodied channel. I don't like what he's sharing. It doesn't make sense to me. It's not truth. So it feels to me like it's all just the perspective of what resonates with us. And I think we have different, we come here with different gifts to share and different perspectives to bring to life. And someone else will appear to us to be a clear and embodied channel when what they are saying resonates with us. Like it really hits a chord of truth.
Like the signals that are moving through their channel are almost, I suppose that word resonance again, it's like those,
Yeah.
Some channels are more resonant with some people, some channels are less resonant with other people.
Yeah. So for me, the judgment would be, is this creating more love? Is this bringing peace to my heart? Is this liberating me from my limiting beliefs? Is this helping me release my judgments, my expectations, my projections onto life? Is it helping me access the quantum realm of infinite possibility? Is it softening my heart? Is it opening my heart? Is it instilling trust? That to me is a clear channel, and you can feel it. It's beyond the person's words, because it's not just the cerebral communication that they're offering. It's also the frequency that you can just feel emanating from them, and you can like receive through the tones of their voice.
Their vibration.
Yeah.
Yeah. The term has come up a couple times now, and I suppose this is how my channel sometimes operates, is certain words will stand out almost like you ever as a kid, you know those things just like you put your hand under it and there's like all these pins and needles or whatever, and you put your hand and then your hand you're like the shape of your hand shows up on the like top of it. You ever seen those things?
Oh yeah,
You know
the
what I'm
little
talking about?
mold. Yeah,
Yeah, it's like
yeah,
it molds the shape of your hand and you're like, sure, oh, you can do different shapes or whatever. So
yeah.
I'm fascinated in understanding autism, and I feel like my understanding and relationship with it and how it's grown has considerably affected my life in a positive way in understanding my skill set and differentiating from the trauma that happened and the gift that the trauma was uncovering, so to speak.
Mm,
And in my sensory body, yeah, like certain words will stand out, and yeah, that's the image that just came out. A lot of it's synesthesia. Words will just point to a vision, and a vision's like, what does this have to do with anything? It's like, I don't know, just say it. It's part of it.
mm,
But the word has come up several times of judgment, and I feel like this is something that's uh, come up for maybe many along the spiritual journey is this kind of judgment, and probably many in the Western world who have found themselves to be primarily a mental identity, and then finding this experience of, well, I'm not the mind, but they're still kind of realizing that in the mind. And then there becomes these double negatives. At least I've experienced that. And I've talked to other people who have experienced that. Sometimes it leads to these experiences of like psychosis and like, wait, my mind's going overactive and stuff like that. Breath work can be really helpful, etc. But the word judgment for me is such a pure word. You know, the judge of the mom, the adjudication. I have a brother who talks about it's really just about adjudicating the math. He always says that. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he's just like, it's just about seeing mathematics clearly. It's not about judging them in a fear of not loving them. But if I'm in a healthy, sensible state, then when I pick up this cup of hot liquid, I see the steam coming from it, and I see the how the glass is foggy or whatever. There's byproducts of its truth, of what it really is, and it causes me, if I am in sound judgment of it, it causes me to pick it up gently and maybe sip it. If it's really hot tea, I'm sipping it is a byproduct of a judgment of its heat. And then obviously then we're talking about also unhealthy judgments of talking about somebody and like, I don't like the way that they do that, or I don't think they're as good as those people. And those are the places where I think judgment has become so sticky for us as a culture. But can you speak on that for a minute, maybe, of like, obviously there's healthy judgments, and then obviously judgment can become toxic at a certain point, but how to keep ourselves in some level of proper alignment or balance to clearly see when a judgment is a healthy one and when it's not.
mm. I like to think of healthy judgments more as discernment.
Right. I like that word.
Meanwhile, unhealthy judgment is something that has me close my heart to someone or something, or believe that I am in some way superior. And usually, unhealthy judgment I see more as a protective mechanism. I feel that a lot of judgments are actually saying more about us than they say about the person that we're judging. And they're pointing us towards our fears and to what it is that we do not accept and we are still in resistance to or fighting against. I also don't see like it's either unhealthy or healthy. I feel like it exists on a continuum, like on a spectrum.
Spectrum.
Yeah, and at different times judgments can be great. Well, discernment judgments, they can be really supportive. An example I can think of my personal life is that I was in a really challenging relationship for a few years. And throughout that time, I was very oriented to unconditional love and compassion and forgiveness and acceptance and infinite possibility. I just kept telling myself anything is possible between us, even though this dynamic is challenging, even though the alchemy between us is quite what you might call toxic. I, I trust in infinite possibility and I trust in the power of love. And I very much was holding this perspective in relationship to this relationship. And eventually I drank some wachuma, which is it's a sacred cactus, it's a plant medicine. And the wachuma showed me a different perspective, which is what you might call discernment or judgment, where it was like, whoa, this is not in alignment for me. I do not like this. I do not want this. My orientation was radically different. It was like, I feel mistreated. I feel all these things like this is not working for me. And there was no like blame of like, I am actually being mistreated. You are mistreating me. It was none of that in the medicine space, but it was more of an honoring of my human experience of the relationship, which you could call a judgment or discernment, which then had me end the relationship. And that was an incredible coming home to love for me,
Mm.
which was interesting because I thought that I was orienting myself to love by honoring my commitment and by staying in the relationship. But really, it was the completing of it, even though it was not what he wanted at all, that actually realigned me and returned me to love and then opened me up to eventually another relationship that doesn't hold any of those challenges. I mean, it holds different kinds of challenges, but challenges that are really resonant with my soul. It's like, oh, I can see my ego here. Versus in the other dynamic, it was like my soul was like, this isn't right.
Man, feel that. Uh, Such a bright reflection of some of my experiences as well. Of, and I'm sure many who listen as well to this is like getting in touch with our expansion can sometimes slightly disorient us to how we, you could call it contract. And again, there's a spectrum with everything, yes, but in between the polarities of that, sometimes we're in a paradoxical state, and then sometimes there's no paradox. It's just pure. It's just pair. There's no dox. It's just pair. And I just think those are the moments where I feel my system, my channel, my system, my mechanics, my expansion, my vessel, I feel so yummy. I feel so it feels like a visceral yes from my system, because I know there are many on this journey that don't even call it spirituality, they call it mental health.
Mm.
Excuse me. And in that, I'm interested in, you know, especially with a podcast like this, in finding those moments where we can distill such a potentially complicated or complex, I use the word tapestry a lot, because it's like, oh yeah, let's talk about this. It's like, yeah, this isn't just this. Like on the iPhone screen, you open it up, you zoom in, and what you thought was just a one dot, you know, on the map, you start zooming in, zoom in, all of a sudden it's a huge city and there's tons of buildings, and you didn't see any of this from that other vantage point. So opening something up, it's like it illuminates the paradox and shows the segments of the spectrum, or at least that's how this is felt to me. At different points, there are certain things that are just like, that's paradox, that's period, that's, I don't know where else to go from that, or comma or hyphen. But I love that last articulation that came through you, because it's like discernment from the heart is kind of its own thing. Discernment from the mind is its own thing. It feels like it's easier to get lost in the mind, but we can also get lost in the heart. And it's like, if we're not calibrated full spectrum, talk about a spectrum, our own vessel is a spectrum. I find it important and helpful to, yeah, check in on, and also check in with loved ones that not everybody's a relevant mirror, but some we feel are relevant mirrors. Very much why I felt called to check in with you. Some hold a posture that feels like their mirror has the angle of perception that our system is needing to, we can't see on the other side of the elbow, and we need a mirror. We need someone to help us see that place that is our blind spot. So it's not always about, just a pure judgment of right or wrong, but there is like a hot and cold, and there is a way to navigate. And I feel like those are moments that I'm interested in not collapsing and totally simplifying to eradicate the beauty and the poetry of the complexity, but sometimes in finding those things that are complex, there are simple ways to move through them, that at some point we find this like aha moment. I call them visceral clarities. And sometimes it's just like, I can't ever look away from that. It's so obvious right now. And all that led up to it was this pressure that built up that then bloop, popped as a bubble in my heart with this experience of clarity. Yeah, not really a question in that, but that's what came up after you shared about the difference between discernment and judgment as you did.
Mm-hmm. Love it. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I feel like we've dove in for a beautiful amount of time, and I just feel so grateful and so honored that you share the space and share what comes through you in such an elegant way, such a regal way. You are an incredible embodiment of the infinite, and you are also a beautiful example of a priestess and a woman and a sister and a keeper of the medicine that you allow through you, and just really grateful for your articulation. I know that many others are as well. My last like closing kind of baton is thus. In moving into this thing called life deeper and deeper every day, have you found some level of a simple statement or a compass that if somebody were to ask you, like, what is it that you would say is the most important thing that you've learned in living life and navigating life? What's the most important thing that you could share to anyone who would potentially listen?
Love, acceptance, peace, trust, and power, which to me are all under the umbrella of love. Through love, we find acceptance. Through love, we find our power. And through love, we trust in life. We trust in divinity. We trust in the powers that be. And that gives us peace.
Sounds like a snowball of love. Beautiful. Yeah. Well, thank you for entrusting this time space with your energy. And where can people find more about you, or do you have anything that you'd like to share about your offerings, or website, or sponsor plugs, or?
So I got my website. It's danielagill.love. And my biggest offering is my Akashic Metamorphosis practitioner training, which is an intuitive development group mentorship training where you learn how to channel, how to access a Akashic perspective, and then also how to share sessions with others. We also dive into a bit around developing spiritual business and marketing and all of that from like a no-aligned place, a place that feels really authentic and true. So that's my ultimate offering. I also offer one-on-one sessions. If anyone's interested, you can book on my website. You can also find me on Instagram and on YouTube. On Instagram, I'm Daniela Gill Love. I would love to share with you. So please connect. And thank you, Rocco, for this beautiful opportunity. It was so lovely to drop in with you and to receive all of your perspectives and to weave together in this way. And I'm so celebrating this podcast that you're creating and putting out there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you and your, just all that you are, the love that moves through you. Simple as that. Thank you. Well, thanks for tuning in. And Daniela, I'm sure we'll be talking soon. I definitely, at some point when it's aligned, would love to tune into that Akashic record training. That sounds beautiful.
Yes, I would love to share with you.
Wonderful. All right. Thanks for tuning in. Till next time.